What if, in order to attain sentence level fluency in classical Arabic, all you needed was to master two core issues? That's it. And the types of sentences in Arabic are also two. So if you understood the two types of sentences, the nominal sentence, what we call jumla ismiya, and the verbal sentence, the jumla fi'liya, and you understood that each of those two sentences has a core issue that's distinct and that needs to be resolved. Just imagine the amount of focus you'd have. Like when you're studying, you would know exactly whether you're tackling problem A or tackling problem B. And if you're spending your time studying something that's other than those two issues, then it's really not the most productive use of your time. So inshallah, in today's video, I'm going to share with you a very simple and reliable framework to get your head around these two issues. And you'll understand clearly what grammar is all about. So this presentation is incredibly important. In the premium program, it's one of the top 3 videos in the first 6 months. And I'm giving to you the entire presentation. It's about an hour long. And by the end of today's presentation, you will reach sentence level fluency. That's it. And then you can start an actual Arabic reading book, and then you can consolidate what you've learned in this session. In addition to the presentation, I'm also going to share with you the 40 plus slides that I've used in today's video, and the link for that will be in the description below. So let's now move on to the PowerPoint, and I'll continue speaking with you there. Okay, so the point of this video is just to keep you focused, just so that you know exactly what's the big concept, what's the core concept. We got to keep this in mind. So it starts off with that sentence that we led with, and I'll just remind you of that sentence. Here it is. In the Arabic language, the majority of meanings do not come from words. Instead, they come from, number 1, vowels, number 2, patterns, and number 3, grammatical structures. So if you take a paragraph of sentences in Arabic and you want to translate it into any other language, you would need at least twice the amount of words, if not even more than that, if you were to do it properly, because the consonants are giving you separate meaning, and then the vowels are giving you separate meaning, and then on top of that, the way in which the words are arranged together is giving you even more meaning. So there's these 3 areas that we need to focus on. The meanings that are achieved from the vowels, the meanings that are achieved from the patterns, and finally the meanings that are achieved from grammatical structures. So patterns is sarf. Like the alphabet has 28 letters in it, they're all consonants, and meanings are achieved by grouping the consonants into groups of 3. So if you were to take the alphabet and group it into groups of 3, you'd have tens of thousands of groups. Every group of 3 consonants has an associated meaning, but then you're not able to pronounce them, because when people speak, they speak in syllables. Consonants on their own are not pronounceable. So the vowels come to, number 1, remove the limitation and allow the letters to be spoken. Okay, and number 2, it gives you more meaning, more specifically the tense and the voice, and this is highlighted through the Stansaru example, right? When we say vowels in this context, what we mean is that the vowels at the end of the noun. So al-baytu versus al-bayta versus al-bayti, or Zaydun versus Zaydan. So at the end of the ism, there's a particular vowel that's differentiating between the role of the ism. In other languages, you might need separate words to do that. In Arabic, it's done through vowels. So those are the vowels we're talking about when we say vowels and patterns and grammatical structures. Grammatical structures is obviously the sanctioned methods and the ways in which the nouns could be combined together. So when you take 2 words and combine them together through one of the methods sanctioned by the language, then you always end up getting more than what you started off with. Okay, so that's phrases. Now, when we speak about sentences, which is the topic of this presentation, the first thing is, what's the definition of a sentence? So here's a very brief definition. It's not on the slide. It's basically when you take 2 or more words and you connect them together in a manner that conveys to the listener a complete benefit, upon which silence is appropriate. I'll say it again one more time. When you take 2 or more words and connect them together in a manner that communicates to the listener a complete benefit upon which silence is appropriate. In other words, once you're done speaking your 2 or more words and then you become quiet, one of 2 things will happen. Either your listener will be satisfied and they will have received a complete benefit and they're not waiting for anything further. Okay? That's one possibility. And the other possibility is that they're still waiting and they want you to finish it. If they're not waiting, then that means what you said was a sentence and you can put a period and you're done. And if they're still waiting, then that means what you spoke was a phrase. Every sentence has 2 parts. There's the primary portion, which we call the subject,
and this is the thing you're talking about. And this has to be a noun or has to be an entity, like the word Zayd. I can create multiple examples, and what you would see is Zayd is a human, Zayd is tall, Zayd is in the house. So the word Zayd would be the subject of the sentence, and regardless of the kind of predicate, the subject will always be a noun. The predicate could also be a noun. So now you have two nouns. Or the predicate could be an adjective. The predicate could be a compound structure. It could be a verb. It could be a verb plus an object. So here's the 5 examples. If you remember these 5 examples, you'll never forget this topic. The 5 examples are: number 1, Zayd is a human. Number 2, Zayd is tall. Number 3, Zayd is in the house. Number 4, Zayd went. And number 5, Zayd hit Amr. So what's common between all 5 of those examples? What's common is that the word Zayd is at the front. In all 5 of them, Zayd is at the front. So we can say that regardless of the kind of predicate you're dealing with, the noun will always be at the front. Okay, so in the first example, the predicate was another noun. So they're both nouns. Zayd is a human. In the second example, the predicate is an adjective. Zayd is tall. In the third example, the predicate is a compound structure. Zayd is in the house. The fourth example is where the predicate is a verb. So the predicate is changing. Okay? Predicate is a verb. And in the fifth example, the predicate is a verb plus an additional object. So it's like a 2-word predicate. Zayd hit Amr. Regardless of the kind of predicate you use, Zayd will always be at the front. Okay? Now, in English, all 5 examples, Zayd is at the front. But in Arabic, what will happen is that in 3 of them, Zayd will be at the front. But in 2 of them, the verb would be at the front and Zayd would get pushed forward. Okay? Yeah, because you don't have to use a verb. Like in the top 3 examples, there's no verb. In the 4th and 5th examples, there's verbs. And the minute you choose to use a verb, what happens is that the verb will be at the front. Because it's a rule. Because in Arabic, subjects of verbs must follow the verbs. So here are the 5 examples restated again, this time in Arabic. So Zayd is a human is Zaydun insanun. Zayd is tall is Zaydun tawilun. Zayd is in the house is Zaydun fil bayti. Zayd went is Dhahaba Zaydun. And Zayd hit Amr would be Daraba Zaydun Amran. Okay, so now what you're seeing here is that regardless of the kind of predicate you use in English, the subject is always at the front. In Arabic, in 60% of the time, the subject is at the front. 40% of the time, the subject gets pushed forward and the verb is at the front. So is this significant? The answer is very significant. Now, the grammar people, they noticed this. And based on this, they said this change is so fundamental. Let's go ahead and let's assign it a classification. So they took the sentence and they divided the sentence into 2 types. And they said sentences that begin with isms, we're going to call them jumla ismiya, and sentences that begin with verbs, we're going to call them jumla fi'liya. So in those 5 examples, the top 3 are examples of jumla ismiya, and the bottom 2 are examples of jumla fi'liya. Now, in the top 3, we can say those are sentences without verbs. Now, technically, the word is a verb, but it's not represented in Arabic. Zaydun insanun only has 2 words. Zaydun tawilun only has 2 words, right? So I can say that in the top 3 examples, those are verbless. Because in this context, when I say verb, I'm talking about hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking. The top 3 examples do not have a verb of that kind, of the hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking kind, right? So it's about whether it's there or whether it's not there. So if it's not there, then jumla ismiya. And if that kind of verb, hitting and helping and sitting and standing, is being used, then automatically it causes a rearrangement in the words, and the predicate now is preceding, and the doer of the verb is delayed. So since this happens in Arabic and it doesn't happen in English, so that's why the number of terms that you need to retain in English are just 2. And they are, number 1, subject, number 2, predicate. In Arabic, because there's this fundamental shift occurring that in certain sentences the subject is at the front and in other sentences the subject is pushed forward, that's why the grammar people in Arabic, they have 6 terms. Instead of 2 terms, they have 6 terms. So there's the 2 terms that are generic, subject and predicate, regardless of the kind of sentence you're dealing with. And then there's the 4 more specific terms, and these are represented on this slide. Okay, so just take a minute and focus on this. So basically, in the far left, we have musnad ilay and musnad. So that's regardless of the kind of sentence you're dealing with. So every sentence has a musnad ilay and a musnad. Now, when you go more specific, and they ask you the question, Zaydun insanun, what are those? So you could say Zayd is musnad ilayh and insanun is musnad, and that would be okay, that would be valid, but it's like referring to wine as a liquid. There's no need to do that. There's no need to refer to wine as a liquid, because we have a better word, and the better word is beverage. Okay, did you understand that? So the difference between beverage and liquid. So the difference between mubtada and musnad ilayh is the difference between beverage and liquid. So mubtada is more specific, and musnad ilayh is more generic. Okay, so do we totally discard musnad ilayh and musnad? No, they have their use as well. Musnad ilayh and musnad are useful. Like in balagha, for example, in balagha, when it's more conceptual, like the ideas, when they're in their head, they're called musnad ilayh and musnad, and then you look for words to communicate the ideas in your mind. So now, when you say it, the format you use would dictate the terms that will now be applied. While they were in your mind conceptually, they're musnad ilayh and musnad, and then when they appear in the language, when they're used in an actual sentence, now you're not going to call it musnad ilayh and musnad, you'll use the more specific terms, mubtada and khabar in the case of the nominal sentence, and fi'l and fa'il in the case of the verbal sentence. Okay, so let's continue now with further examples. So we already have 5 examples, and those 5 examples are somewhat sufficient to understand this topic. Okay, but if you want to go with the basic examples for the nominal sentence, we have al-kitabu jadidun, and the translation is the book is new. So this is an example of a sentence that doesn't have a verb. And again, when I say it doesn't have a verb, I'm talking about hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking kind of verb, because the word is automatic anyways. Like, I mean, there's no word that represents is. Now, you still have to be able to differentiate it from the phrase, because you don't want it confusing with new book, because what we have in front of us is a sentence. The book is new. So how do you do that? So we'll talk about that in a few minutes in one of the upcoming slides. Let's keep going. So this al-kitabu jadidun, when you contrast it with the 5 examples, which example does it line up with the best? The correct answer is it lines up with the second one, because the second one was Zayd is tall, and tall is an adjective, jadid is an adjective. So that's the example. Okay, now an example of a basic verbal sentence, keeping in mind the fact that the doer of the verb must follow the verb, would be this: Dhahaba Zaydun, Zayd went, which is identical to the 4th example I gave you earlier. Zayd went. Now, what happens if you come across a noun followed by a verb? Take a minute, let that sink in. What would happen if you came across an example in a book, or in a verse of the Quran, or in some speech of some person who's an authority and clearly not making a mistake? They took a noun, and instead of bringing the verb before the noun, they brought the verb after the noun. For example, they said something like Zaydun Dhahaba. Zaydun Dhahaba. What did they say? They said Zaydun Dhahaba. So this is unusual, and it sort of flies in the face of everything we've covered up until now, and you would not expect it to be valid. You would not expect it to be valid, because the principle was that whenever you use the verb, then the verb has to be at the front, and the doer of the verb is delayed. So one thing is for sure, Zayd is not the fa'il, because fa'il cannot precede the verb. Okay, so you really have one of 2 options when you're confronted with Zaydun Dhahaba. Option number 1 is you can dismiss it, and you can just say, I don't believe in that, or I feel it's an error, and consider it invalid, and then just move on with life. And now you can live your life with a clean conscience, and there's no dilemma. You see, a dilemma only happens when you accept the validity of the conflicting evidence. Okay, I'll say that again. A dilemma only occurs when you had some preconceived notion, and now you're confronted with something that flies in the face of what you were taught earlier, and you accept the validity of this new piece of information. Now there's a dilemma, because now you have to reconcile. So how do you do that? How do you reconcile? Zaydun Dhahaba. Okay, so from these 2 options, what we'll do is we'll take option number 2. In other words, we're going to say Zaydun Dhahaba is valid. We're going to say Zaydun Dhahaba is valid. And the reason is because it's in the language, and it's in the Quran, and there's a lot of examples, and no person with a sound mind would argue against the validity of Zaydun Dhahaba. So that goes without saying that Zaydun Dhahaba is valid. So now we have to explain it. So how do we do it? We do it by claiming the total number of words 3. So Zaydun Dhahaba on paper are 2 words, Zaydun Dhahaba, but we're going to say that the total number of words are 3. And if we do that, then there's no longer a dilemma and the issue is resolved. Pause the video right now, think about that. Think about what I just said. When you take Zaydun Dhahaba and you claim that the total number of words are 3, how is that a resolution to the dilemma? Okay? Again, pause the video and think about that a minute, and now I'll proceed. Basically, Zaydun Dhahaba is valid. And if you remember, back in week 1, when we were speaking about the verb table, فعل فعلا فعلوا فعلت فعلتا فعلنا فعلت فعلتم, remember that? We spoke about how the consonants are voweled with the fatha. Fa'ala, like nasara, jalasa, and that's where we get the past tense from. And then at the end of the verb, you add an alif to reflect 2 people, 2 men. And if you add a waw, then it becomes a group of males. If you add a ta, then it becomes she, etc., etc., ta, tumatum. So those letters at the end of the verb were actual pronouns. So if they ask you, jalasta, how many words is it? The correct answer is 2. And there's no problem with that, because you'd circle the jalas part, and you'd say that's the verb, and the ta part, and you'd circle it separately and say that's the fa'il, and now you have a fi'l and a fa'il. So jalasta is actually a full sentence. It has everything a full sentence would need. And the total number of words are 2. Okay? So for every one of those 14 within the table, it could be said. It could be said that this is 2 words, this is 2 words, this is 2 words, this is 2 words. Jalastuma is 2 words, jalasna is 2 words. So you point at the verb part and you call that a word, and you point at the extra part and you call that a word. And that is true. Because that na and that tu and that ta and that ti, these are all pronouns, and a pronoun is an ism. So it's written beside the verb with no space in between, but it's actually 2 words. Okay. Now from all of those 14, the top one didn't have an ending. And it was just fa'ala on its own. And the translation was he helped. So where did the he come from? So it came from pulling out a huwa. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, so you pull out a huwa, and this is what we mean when we say 3 words. So wherever you see a dhahaba occurring in the middle of a sentence or in the middle of a paragraph, it's possible for it to mean only went, and it's also possible for it to mean he went, carrying a pronoun. So how do you know which one's which? So when the verb is followed by a noun, then at that point, dhahaba would only mean went. It wouldn't mean he went. It would only mean went. It would be empty. The verb would be empty. So dhahaba Zaydun, how many words? Total number of words 2. Zaydun dhahaba, how many words? Total number of words 3. The reason. And the reason we're doing that is because Zayd is disqualified, and the principle was that every fi'al must have a fa'il following it, and since Zayd is disqualified, so then the huwa would satisfy the requirement. So on paper it's 2, but in reality it's actually 3. So what we've done is we've accepted the validity of Zaydun dhahaba, and we've understood it in a way that it no longer clashes with our previous understanding. Okay, so now how do you reflect that into the translation? So if they ask you Zaydun dhahaba, what does it mean? You can't say it means Zayd went, because that was the earlier one. Okay, Zaydun dhahaba, if they ask you what does it mean, you can't just translate the earlier one and say it means Zayd went, because then there's no difference between the two. So how do you translate it? So there's a number of ways you can communicate this translation in English. You'd say that Zayd, comma, he went. So like Zayd, and the comma is just for English, like Zayd, he went. In other words, it was Zayd that did the going, and not Amr or Bakr or some other person that you thought was doing the going. No, Zayd went. So you can do it with your tonality. Zayd went. Or you can say, it was Zayd that did the going, and not any other person that you might be under the impression that he did the going. No, it was Zayd specifically that did the going. So bringing forward something that should have been delayed. Bringing forward something that should have been delayed and creating a double mention of it. Okay? Because Dhahaba Zaydun is only one mention of Zayd. Zaydun Dhahaba is 2 mentions of Zayd. One through the noun at the front, and the other through the pronoun that's connected to the noun. So it's like saying Zayd twice. So that's the equivalent of bold-facing something, or italicizing it, or underscoring it. Or, so within the language, we have these various ways of communicating a single meaning that allow stress. So just like you can take an object of a verb and bring it at the front, and Amran daraba Zaydun, it means it was Amr that Zayd hit, as opposed to Zayd hit Amr, because you brought it at the front. So now it puts the emphasis and the stress on the part that you put at the front. So same thing with a doer of a verb. If you try to bring the doer of the verb, you're not really bringing the file before the verb, you're recategorizing the sentence, and a verbal sentence, you're turning it into a nominal sentence. So if they ask you Zayd grammatically, what is it? The correct answer is it's mubtada. The correct answer is it's mubtada, and then dhahaba along with its huwa would be the khabar. Okay, and if you need to rewatch that a couple of times, by all means do that. Rewatch it a couple of times. This is very clear. It's not complicated at all. So now we have a basic nominal sentence example, al-kitabu jadidun. We have a basic verbal sentence example, dhahaba zaydun, and we have a third example which is unconventional, and that's zaydun dhahaba. And I've given you the understanding behind it so that you can accept its validity and also you can live comfortably. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's expand. Now, if a verbal sentence is just 2 words, not a big deal. Dhahaba zaydun, not a big deal, right? It really can't mean anything else. The translation would be Zayd went. But if the sentence is larger and longer, okay, then now it becomes an issue of how do you differentiate between the roles of the ism? Okay, you'd have to be able to slot those isms in their proper slots. So for that, let's revisit the parts of speech. If you remember, the parts of speech in Arabic are just 3. In English, there are more. And it's this graphic here. So the ism in Arabic is not just noun. It's also serving all of the purposes that an adjective and adverb would serve. So if I say today I came quickly. Today I came quickly. So in that example, there's the verb came, and then there's the I, and then there's the today, and then there's the quickly. So in English, that would be a verb plus a pronoun plus 2 adverbs. Today is an adverb and quickly is also an adverb. But in Arabic, we'd simplify it. We wouldn't say that. We would say that's a verb followed by 3 isms. Did you understand that? Verb followed by 3 isms. So the point is that the verbal sentence could become longer. Now, the bare minimum for a verbal sentence is, along with the verb, there has to be at least 1 ism, 1 noun. And that noun could be like physically present noun, or it could be carried within the verb. So if it's just dhahaba and they don't really say anything else, all they say is dhahaba, that's 2 words also. Because you can't have a sentence that's less than 2 words. That's not 2 words. It has to be at least 2 words. So dhahaba zaydun is 2 words, and dhahaba on its own is also 2 words. Okay, now for the maximum, there's no limit. And the verbal sentence could be longer. And what dictates the length of the verbal sentence is the amount of details that the speaker chooses to disclose. Because the sentence will have a when, and a where, and a why, and a how. So if it's relevant, and if it's important, and if the speaker feels the need to communicate that, the speaker would need to add additional isms to the sentence in order to communicate those details. You see? So it's quite normal for a verbal sentence to be followed by 3 to 5 isms. Very normal. Okay? Right, so here's an example. Darabtu al-yawma amran. Today I hit Amr. So this is an example of a verb followed by 3 isms. So 1 ism is the to, the other ism is the al-yawm, and the third ism is the amran. So in English that would be a verb followed by a pronoun, adverb, and noun. But we don't make that distinction, so we say verb followed by 3 isms. You got it. And here's another example where it's a verb followed by, again, 3 isms. An adverb followed by a noun followed by another noun. Right? So when the verbal sentence is only 2 words, then there's no issue because it can't mean anything else. It can only mean Zayd went. Right? So the minute it becomes longer, now it's an issue of which of the 2 nouns is the one doing the verb and which of the 2 nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. And if there's adverbs being used, then the reader and the listener need to know what those adverbs are doing. In other words, which questions are they answering? So pretend there's a verb followed by 5 isms. One of those 5 isms is the one doing the verb. One of those 5 isms is the one upon whom the verb is being done. One of those 5 isms is the answer to the question when, and then one of those 5 isms is, for example, the answer to the question how. Okay, and another one could be another detail that they're disclosing. Now, what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to read the sentence and not spend too much time and be able to effortlessly slot those isms into their proper roles, and you got to do it without wasting mental energy. Okay, because the assumption is that you're going to read 12. You're lying on your bed and you have the tafsir of, I don't know, Ibn Jarir in your hands, and you're reading through what the scholar is writing. So if you're pausing on every verbal sentence and you're spending 5 minutes to determine which noun is the doer and which noun is the object and which noun is the when, which ism is the when and the where and the why and the how, then you're gonna gas out before you get through a single paragraph. So how do you facilitate speed reading? And how do you go through pages and pages and dozens of pages of material without feeling overwhelmed? You have to be able to do this. You have to be able to slot those isms into their proper roles. So this becomes particularly significant and important given the fact that sequence does not determine grammar. Now, some languages, they use sequence to do it. Some languages do use extra words. So Arabic doesn't have extra words to help you with this, and Arabic also doesn't use sequence. So in Urdu, for example, when they want to say Zayd Amr, they say Zayd ne, Amr ko, Mara. So we have the extra word ne, we have the extra word ko. So with that, it becomes a non-issue. Like differentiating between the roles of the isms becomes a non-issue because the ne and the ko are doing it for us. Right? In English, the order of the words is determining the grammar. So again, it's a non-issue. So in Arabic, since sequence does not determine grammar, and we don't have extra words, so we need to be able to do it. So how do we do it? So we do it through a particular process. And this is the process that's likened to human emotions and facial expressions, and we call it the grammatical states process. So let me give you an example on the next slide with 6 ways of saying Zayd Amr. Okay, there's 6 ways of saying Zayd Amr. So one of them is the default one, and that's the one that's here. Dhahaba Zaydun Amran. So if you wanted to communicate that Zayd Amr, and that's really all you're doing, then you wouldn't deviate away from Dhahaba Zaydun Amran, that's the one you would use. Now the other 5 are available, and they're all valid, and they also mean the same thing. They also mean Zayd Amr. They're all available for you to create a better match with the audience. So the listener might already know that the hitting happened, and the listener might already know that it was Zayd that did the hitting, and the only new information you're communicating is that it was Amr that Zayd hit, in which case you would use this one, Amran daraba Zaydun. So that's the benefit of this. The benefit of this is that it gives you flexibility. You can arrange the verb and the 2 nouns in multiple ways, and you can create a better match with the requirement of the occasion. Does that make sense? Now, grammar-wise, so how do we differentiate between the roles? We differentiate between the roles because Zaydun in all 6 examples is dun. Amran in all 6 examples is Amran. So the particular ending that Zayd has tells us that Zayd's the doer. The particular ending that Amr has is telling us that Amr is the object. Now it doesn't matter whether Zayd's at the front or whether Zayd's in the middle or whether Zayd's at the end. The meaning's the same. Okay. So the problem within verbal sentence is that sequence does not determine grammar, and the solution is to know the grammatical states and to know how they are reflected at the end on the ends of the isms. In the case of the nominal sentence, it's a different issue. Now again, when the nominal sentence is just 2 words, it's a non-issue. Because al-kitabu jadidun, it really can't mean anything else. Of course, you'd have to still be able to keep it separate from the phrase. Like you don't want to mix it up with the phrase. Okay, now I've written the phrase on the slide, al-kitabul jadidu, that one's a phrase. So that's merely a function of knowing the requirements of the phrase, that in the mawsuf sifa, in the noun adjective phrase, both parts of the phrase need to match in their definite indefinite value. So when you know that, and then you're faced with al-kitabu jadidun, you have no trouble disqualifying the phrase because al-kitabu jadidun are not matching. Al-kitabu is definite and jadidun is indefinite, so therefore it can't be a phrase. So with that out of the way, there's no issue. It's become a non-issue. Now, even though there is no is, what else would you do? You translated the book is new. You see? But when the nominal sentence becomes larger, like 3 words, 4 words, 5 words, now, and the fact that we don't have an is, now you have to be able to divide the sentence into its proper parts, and you'd have to determine from where to where is the mubtada, where to where is the khabar. In English, this is a non-issue. Because in English, I can give you a very long sentence in English, and you would have no trouble figuring out the meaning of it. For example, this book, which Ishaq alayhi salam built, this masjid, which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham, is Baytul Maqdis. Did you have any trouble with that? No. It was 10 plus words, but still you had no trouble with it because there was a word within that English that what was on the left side of that word was the subject, and what's on the right side of the word is the predicate, and that is the word is. It's there in the English. Okay, yeah. So here's the example. This masjid which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. So the word so you would say all the words until the word Sham is the subject and Baytul Maqdis would be the predicate. Now if I do that in Arabic, here's how it is. هذا المسجد الذي بناه إسحاق في الشام بيت المقدس. This masjid which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. So I dropped it in the proper spot. So I know from Hadha until the word Sham, all of those words together are connecting and forming the Mubtada, and Baytul Maqdis will be the Khabar. Baytul Maqdis will be the Khabar. Now, but the Arabic doesn't have an is. So how do we do it? How do we figure this out? Like conceivably, it could have been Hadha on its own as the Mubtada, and then Al-Masjid until the end, all of those words together connecting and forming the predicate. It could have been the first two words on their own being the subject, and then alladhi onwards connecting and forming the predicate. So how do we know this? Remember the earlier issue in the verbal sentence was that the verb was followed by multiple isms, and we needed to be able to slot those isms into their proper roles without wasting mental energy, and we had to be able to do it effortlessly, especially given the fact that sequence does not determine grammar and we don't have extra words. So how is it done? It's done by knowing the process that's likened to human emotions and facial expressions, and that's taught in week 3. Okay, and a little of it I'll teach right now as well. In the nominal sentence, the issue is a completely different issue. It's the lack of is issue, and it's to be able to determine from where to where is the mubtada, where to where is the khabar, specifically when there's no is to do it for us. So how do we do it? We do it by moving from right to left and looking for phrase level relationships. And at some point, we'll notice that the phrase level relationships stop and they exhaust, and there's no requirements being satisfied. When that happens, you know your mubtada is over, and you know that that's where the predicate begins. Yeah, so it's done by knowing the phrase level relationships. Okay, so the types of phrases in Arabic are 16. There's 16, and the possessive phrase is one of them. The descriptive phrase is one of them, and the requirements for a possessive phrase are: number one, noun A needs to be empty of al, noun A needs to not have tanween, and noun B needs to end in kasra or be in the state of jar, have a very specific ending as opposed to other endings that are possible. So kitabu Zaydin. You see? So if you start your sentence with a noun that's empty of al and also doesn't have tanween, and then the second word in the sentence is in jar, then you can't drop the is in between and say kitab is mubtada and zayd is the predicate. You can't do that because the two are functioning as a single unit. Does that make sense? So as long as the requirements of a particular phrase are being satisfied, your predicate cannot begin. It has to happen after all of this is done. You see that? Okay. So look, let's pay a little more attention to this example. If you the word hada, it means this. And I know from my knowledge of the Arabic language. Now, obviously, you will learn this over time. So you might be taught this in week 4 or week 5 or week 6. But at some point, you will know also. The point is that this is an ongoing process. The point is not to learn all of grammar in 1 hour. Because if we knew everything there is to know, so what I'm highlighting the issue and I'm telling you what the solution is. But you're not going to be able to apply this solution until you know the 16 phrases. And that goes without saying, obviously, right? So hadha, I know that when it occurs, it can occur on its own, or it can occur coupled with the upcoming noun as part of a phrase. And what determines whether hadha is on its own versus where hadha is combining with the upcoming noun and forming a phrase is the upcoming noun having an al or not having an al. So over here in this example, هذا المسجد الذي, does the upcoming noun have an al or does it not? The answer is yes, it does. So هذا المسجد is clearly a phrase. So what I wouldn't do is say هذا is mubtada and al-masjid onwards is khabar. That's not allowed. So هذا المسجد together is forming a phrase. Now I do the same thing that I did between هذا and al-masjid with al-masjid and al-ladhi, and I'll look for a phrase level relationship. So I know, based on my knowledge of the Arabic language, and again you will learn this by about week 9 or week 7 or someplace, you will know this. It's like the istansaru example. The istansaru example that was taught in the very beginning. I teach that to people that are called off the street, and people that don't know what passive is, people that don't know what enhancements are, and don't know that sin and ta is for seeking, and nun sadra is for hitting, for helping. So the point is that this is an example. So please don't overthink this. And the topic will be taught at a more appropriate time. So here's the deal, very briefly. Whenever you have a noun and you want to describe it using an adjective as part of a phrase, then you need to make sure that the noun and the adjective are matching. So it would be like al-kitabul jadidu. Okay, and kitabun jadidun. So the first one means the new book, the second one means a new book. We know that. How about if you want to describe a noun using a full sentence? Okay, while keeping the whole thing a phrase, which is what's happening here. Because the masjid is being described by the fact that Ishaq built it in Sham. So Ishaq built in Sham is a full sentence. So when you do that in English, you use who, what, which. So the who, what, which needs to come in between, and you'd say this masjid which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. So in Arabic, the equivalent for that is alladhi. So alladhi will be brought in between, and we have a phrase level relationship going on between al-masjid and the alladhi banahu Ishaq fi Sham structure. Now alladhi banahu Ishaq fi Sham is being introduced with the relative pronoun. Alladhi is called the relative pronoun, and relative pronouns presupposes clauses. Like you can't have a which, who, what, which, and not be followed by a sentence after that. It can't happen. You can't say this is the book which, and then just end it there. Or I read what, and then just end it there. Like it doesn't make any sense. You have to say I read what you wrote. So the you wrote is what I'm talking about. It's called the clause. So we have the relative pronoun plus the clause. The two together connect and form whatever they're going to form. Okay, the two together connect and function as a single unit. So alladhi plus the banahu ishaq fi Sham, this is one of the 16 phrases in case you haven't already figured it out. In case you haven't already figured it out, right? It is. So I know the requirements of it. So I can do this effortlessly. I don't have to spend any time with this at all. Now the point is that as a student, these are the things you're going to be taught, and it's incredibly liberating to know these things ahead of time. Okay, now again, a lot of people, they study for 10 years and nobody shows them this. Nobody shows them the relevance of phrases. They don't know why phrases are important or what role they play. You see, so in this presentation, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting the important topics in grammar, and I'm telling you that here's the relevance of it. So you know the importance and you know the relative importance, and this is huge. It's incredibly valuable. So hopefully you're appreciating it, right? So now that alladhi is there, the predicate cannot start. It can't start. Now that alladhi is there, banahu is a clause, and the clause is a full sentence. So now that sentence has to complete, and unless that sentence completes, the predicate can't start. So ishaqu is the subject, the fa'il for bana, and fish sham is connected to the verb. So now that we hit the word sham, now we see, is there anything missing? Have all of the requirements of the alladhi structure been satisfied? The answer is yes. Now the word baytu is coming. Now does baytu connect in any way, shape, or form? The answer is no. So what do? We drop the is in between. So from hadha until sham, all of those words together connect and form the mubtada, and baytul maqdis connect together and form the khabar, 2 words. So total number of words are 10, and the division is 8 and 2, and I can say that with 100% degree of confidence. My confidence level is 100%. And obviously, when you know all the principles that led to that, then your confidence will also be 100%. And the point is that it becomes subconscious. And when you're reading, you just drop the is in the correct spot, and you don't really need it. Okay, is that fine? So to recap, the problem in the nominal sentence is lack of is, and that's how do you know from where to where is the mubtada and where to where is the khabar. Okay, and the solution is to know the phrase level relationships and be able to move from right to left and exhaust them. And then you drop the is where the phrase level relationships end. Okay? Right. Okay, so phrases are important. Phrases are important because without knowing phrases, you cannot translate that. Like if I give you a 10-word long nominal sentence and I tell you to translate it, your likelihood of translating it correctly is like really low, slim to none, unless you know the 16 phrases. Okay. And again, the 16 phrases, they're not all created equal either. They're not all created equal. There's like 3 or 4 of them that are more important than the other 12 combined. Okay, 80-20, right? There's 3 or 4 of them. Mudaf, mudaf ilayhi, mawsuf, sifa are definitely belong to that, right? So if you know the vocabulary of every word in that 10-word long nominal sentence, and you know the requirements for the phrases, it is mathematically impossible. It's like logically, rationally impossible for you to mistranslate that sentence. That's how important this is. Okay, and if you don't know that, your likelihood of mistranslating is incredibly high. So this knowing the phrases is key, and this is half of grammar essentially. The other half of grammar is the grammatical states. So let me speak a little about the grammatical states, and then I'll end this presentation. Okay, I'll probably go on for another 15 minutes. So grammatical states is important because the ism could be used in many, many different ways. And when a verb is combined with multiple isms, differentiating between the roles of the isms becomes important. It's important to be able to differentiate between the roles of the nouns. So here's how we introduce the topic of grammatical states. So we say that human beings experience emotional states, right? People make us happy, angry, sad, embarrassed, etc., frustrated. Sometimes they satisfy our expectations, other times they don't. And it happens because of interaction with other humans. And these emotions are then reflected on our faces. So by looking at the person's face, you can tell what state they're experiencing. Isn't that right? Okay, now Arabic words behave in a similar fashion. So words interact with other words, they interact with one another, and they induce change, and they cause the upcoming words to enter grammatical states. These states are then reflected on the last letter. Unlike human emotions, which are endless, grammatical states in Arabic are just 3. And we see this to a very limited degree in English pronouns. And when I say we see this, I'm talking about the word looking different based on how it's used. So we have a meaning, and we're trying to communicate that meaning in 3 different sentences. The word would look slightly different in all 3. So this is like in pronouns. For most pronouns, you have 3 versions. You can say he, you can say him, and you can say his. So when the pronoun is intended to be subject of the verb, you'd say he came. When the pronoun is intended to be object of the verb, you'd say I saw him. And when the pronoun is intended to be part of a possessive structure, you say his pen. So why do they have 3? The reason is because you have to pick the correct one, right? You have to pick the correct one, but you wouldn't do that in nouns. So if it's a noun occurring in multiple ways, the noun looks the same. Why? Because sequence is determining grammar. Over there, there's no need to change the word. They're doing it in pronouns, like who knows why. Like the English people, they're doing it in pronouns, so it's interesting. I mean, we're familiar with it, we're somewhat comfortable with it, so we present it as an analogy. Just to give you a little idea. So the states that the ism experiences are 3. One of them is called rafa, the other one's called nasab, and the third one's called jar. And if you wanted, you can write beside the rafa he, beside the nasab write him, and beside the jar write his. So the pronoun would change, but nouns wouldn't. So like if you look at the translation column, it says the house fell, I entered the house, door of the house. So it's house, house, house. But if you look in the example column, in the Arabic, the Arabic word is actually different. Saqat al-baytu versus dakhaltu al-bayta versus babul bayti. Okay, so rafa, subject, nasab, object, jar, possessive. So does rafa mean subject? Does nasab mean object? And does jar mean possessive? You can think of it like that, he, him, and his. Okay, but really, these are just examples. So because the ism is not restricted to being used in just 3 ways. So subject, object, and possessive are examples to get our foot in the door. Okay, so to speak, right? But if you want to go more accurately, you'd have to contemplate the total number of ways an ism could be used. And that number is a large number. It's 22. Okay, why is the number so large? Because the ism is very broad. Okay, and it has a lot to do. Like it has to serve all of the purposes that an adjective would serve. It has to serve all of the purposes that an adverb would serve, like the when, the where, the why, and the how. So an ism would need to do all of that. So if I have a verb followed by 5 isms, that would be 5 examples of the way in which an ism could be used. So one of them subject, the other one's object, the other would be the why, the answer to the question why, and then how, and then where, and when. And then we have different kinds of sentences. We have nominal sentences, we have verbal sentences, we have kana version sentences that begin with kana. and we have in version sentences. And the components of every specific sentence is labeled differently. So in a nominal sentence, the parts are called mubtada and khabar. In a verbal sentence, the parts are called fi'l and fa'il, and if there's an object, then that object is called maf'ul bihi. It has a name, it's called maf'ul bihi. And then the when, where, it has a different name, the why has a different name, and the how there's a different name. So these are all examples of ways in which an ism could be used. So the house example doesn't really do justice, because the house example sort of projects that an ism could be used in 3 ways, but now we know that that can't be true. The total number of ways an ism could be used is a much larger number, and that number is actually 22. Yet, there's only 3 states. So the total number of ways an ism could be used is 22, but the states are just 3. So here's the $1 million question. The $1 million question is that if the ism could be used in 22 different ways, why don't we have 22 different endings? Why don't we have 22 different states? Okay, like the file has its own ending, maf'ul bihi has its own ending, mubtada has its own ending, khabar has its own ending, and in the kana sentence, the subject of the kana sentence has its own ending, the predicate of the kana sentence has its own ending. So why don't we have 22 different endings? The answer is because there's no need for that. That would be redundant. Okay, we don't need many endings. Okay, first of all, we don't have that many endings. All we have is 3 vowels. So we're not going to invent 19 more vowels, because it's impossible. Vowels are somewhat limited to start with. Okay, so we don't have that many endings. And the other is that it would be redundant. We don't need them. And the reason I say we don't need them is because many of the 22 do not line up side by side, and you're not going to hear this anywhere else. So please pay attention. And this is going to be recovered in week 3. Okay, so I'm just giving you a broad overview here as a preview for what's coming in week 3. So like for example, Dhahaba Zaydun. The translation is Zayd went. Zaydun insanun. The translation is Zayd is a human. Now, the vowels that I used on Zayd in the first example are the same vowels I used on Zayd in the second example. But that's not problematic, because the fa'il and the mubtada, you're not going to encounter them side by side. So it allows me to recycle the vowel and use it more than once. And Zaydun and insanun having the same ending is not a problem either. Okay, why not? Because it's not about differentiating roles anyways. It's about knowing where to drop the is, and the solution to that is not this anyways. The solution to that is to know the phrases. So like in that هذا المسجد الذي بناه إسحاق في الشام بيت المقدس example, al-masjidu had a dhamma and baytu had a dhamma, not a problem. Not a problem. It did not stump us. It did not get in our way in understanding the meaning of that sentence. Actually, it played no role whatsoever. So the point is that if a verb is followed by 2 isms and then those 2 isms have the same ending, that would be an issue. That would be a problem, because truly we would not know which of the 2 nouns is the one doing the verb and which of the 2 nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done, because they're both candidates. Zayd could conceivably be the doer, Zayd could conceivably be the object, Amr could conceivably be the doer, Amr could conceivably be the object. So we need them to be different. But the mubtada and the fa'il do not need to be different. The mubtada and the khabar do not need to be different. Okay, did you understand that? Rewatch, please rewatch. If you didn't understand it, rewatch, write it down, transcribe it for yourself, okay, because it is that important. Okay, moving forward, and again, if you got a 60-70, that's fine, because in week 3 we're going to redevelop this topic more. Sometimes the kind of word gives it away, okay? Sometimes the kind of word gives it away, and the best example I can give you of this is this. ضربت اليوم عمرا, the translation is, today I hit Amr. So the word al-yawma and the word amran have the same ending, okay, and yet there's no problem determining the meaning of the sentence, because al-yawm is a time and Amr is an entity. So you can't hit the time, and the entity can't be the answer to the question when. Okay, so the meaning of the sentence is clear, and yet they have the same ending. So what we don't need is 22 different endings. What we do need is the bare minimum amount of endings that would remove all confusion. And that number happens to be 3. And again, you're not going to hear that anywhere else, right? Okay. So what's the task at hand? What do we do now? So what we do now is that we study and we understand the 3 grammatical states, not as subject, object, and possessive. Okay, because rafa doesn't mean subject, nasab doesn't mean object, and jar doesn't mean possessive. Okay, but we understand them thoroughly and with a deep thought, a deep understanding, and we understand them as broad categories. Okay, so the three states that the ism experiences are broad categories, and the 22 possible ways are then distributed on the three. So what's the division? It's 8, 12, and 2. 8, 12, and 2, because it has to add up, right? So there's 8 possible ways an ism is used in the language that are all rafa-based ways of using an ism. And there's 12 that are nasab-based ways of using an ism, and there's 2 for jar. So 8, 12, and 2. And if you know that, I swear by God, you know half of grammar. If you know that. Okay? And the other half is phrases. Oh gosh. Like, I mean, it should feel like a 20-pound weight has been lifted off your shoulders at this stage right now. This is so manageable. This is so manageable. There's no reason in the world why you can't be a master of grammar and, an expert and be able to teach at my level even. Okay, with just a few months of effort. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say that you start reading an Arabic book in 21 days. Okay, or you start understanding Qur'anic Arabic in 21 days. Like, I mean, you can't understand the entire language in 21 days, right? But the point is that most people could be studying for 10 years and they can't even access a basic children's book like this. من كسر الأصنام بائع الأصنام قبل أيام كثيرة. So Arabic is the first thing that the scholars study, and they continue studying it for the rest of their lives. Okay, so the study is not going to complete in 21 days, obviously, right? The point is that you're going to get out of the beginner stage within 21 days, and you're going to be able to access your first Arabic book within 21 days. And that is incredibly liberating, and it means that you're no longer spinning your wheels. So now the front, all of the effort, all of the considerable effort is over, and now it becomes enjoyable because now you're getting the payoff and everything is coming to life. So when we do this man kasar al asnam, we're going to ask questions, and then we don't speak about everything. We speak about the things that we can easily use to enhance the understanding we've achieved thus far, and then we teach new grammar gradually in a way that does not overwhelm the student.
So now that we're done with this two core issue presentation, first of all, I'd like to thank you for making it this far and trusting me with your time and your attention. I really appreciate it. So there's a couple of things I would want to tell you at this stage is that this lesson that we just did right now is actually taken from the course. We would normally teach it in the second week of class. And then the next one, the developing of the 22 possible ways an ism can be used, would be taught in the third week of class. The students would have a 7-day gap between them, and then they'd be asking questions. In between, we would have live classes where we would test the students on their understanding to make sure that they're properly understanding it. And then we'll start the book. We start the book in the third week of class after having developed the 22 possible ways that ism could be used. So the lesson I shared with you was the complete lesson. There was a 10 or 15-minute segment that I removed from the lesson because I didn't want it to be overly complex. So in the premium program, it would be the complete version of it. With the extra part that I removed, it would be added back into it. And the reason I'm doing this and giving you complete lessons is because I made a promise. In the beginning of the first video, I said that we have a method that allows students to progress 17 times faster, and half of all of the benefits you will ultimately achieve in your study of the Arabic language, you can literally achieve them in 3 hours. So that would not have been possible unless I shared with you the lesson that we just went through. And the final presentation is no exception. That also contributes, and together it will give you half of all of your benefits. And then the book begins. So if this message resonates with you, and if you see how this can work for you, then I invite you to look under this video and click the link that says get on the early bird list, because there's a lot of people that are currently watching these videos and there's pent up demand. And these classes, they only start up once a year, only once a year. And we have a limited amount of students that we can accept. So go ahead and join the early bird list. I would also recommend that you rewatch this one a couple of times, the two core issues video, because it's that important. I tell the students that this is one of the 3 most important videos in the first 6 months, and you saw why. And I think that's it for now. Inshallah, I will have the next video for you in a matter of a couple of days. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.